Good morning. Today is Thursday, December 3rd, and this is the Special Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting. And I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are within the territories of the Sechelt and the Squamish First Nations. And given how we are operating with Zoom, we actually are all over that territory. So we have an agenda in front of us. Are there any changes, additions, deletions? I think we've got pretty much one item on this agenda, and that's how it has to be. So I'd look for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. So first, a motion to receive the report. Moved and somebody seconded. All in favor? Oh, yeah, I can't vote on this. This is going to be electoral areas only. All right. Does somebody want to introduce this, or you just want to let me wing it?
Sounds like you're winging.
Oh, looks like I'm winging it. Okay. So what is presented to us is the recommendations and the history with regards to the grant and aid policy and process. If you look on page 2 of our package, there's a list of items that have come up over time that we requested come back to us for consideration. So do we want 2 intakes per year? Late applications, what happens with them? The policy and process review, and we're going to go through that. And the effect on rural areas grant and aid if a social and community services function is to be considered. One other one that has come up in a couple of the comments and such is the limit with regards to grant and aid. Tara, you wanted to?
Thank you, Chair. Good job. That was a good intro. We have a PowerPoint presentation that we're just trying to get up and share the screen. Exactly what you've said. What we are hoping to do today is show the PowerPoint presentation and kind of go through the process and steps of how the grant and aid process is currently, and that'll give us some consideration on what that will look like if there's 2 intakes, and also then step by step through each clause of the policy, so that it's just not, we'll go through one by one more or less, and if you like it, you could say, yes, that's great. If you don't, we want to make some changes, we can have that discussion at that time. So hopefully Tina is able to get the presentation, because unfortunately I can't from my area.
Okay, Director McMahon?
Well, this may be covered in the presentation, but 2 questions I had. I noticed the template that Sherry sent out. This policy in no way is in no way consistent with the current template for policy. So I personally don't have an appetite to rewrite the whole thing at this point, but I sort of wanted to know whether staff wanted a more consistent format.
Okay, so what came up during the agenda review was that if you actually read the policy, it's everything. It's not just a policy, it's also procedures. It's also information for people who are actually applying. So what we kind of looked at was, should we actually split it out and have policy? This is what the policy is. And then procedural guide of some sort and a program guide for the people applying. So that the policy is the policy. And that's where the template came from. So that the template is what should be in the policy. And then we'd look at, like Tara said, they've got the current policy as a PowerPoint that they can share with us on the screen, and we can go through and we could say, no, this doesn't belong in the policy. It goes out, right? So that we clean it up. Because, we started reading some of the clauses in there, and that's, things like, make sure your application's strong to apply. Well, that's not part of a policy, right? So that's kind of the thinking that we were looking at. That would also then give us more clarity, I think, if we were to look at potentially doing some harmonization across the coast, because then it's just policy we're looking at, and then we can deal with intake application processes. Okay, Director Hiltz.
Just in terms of that template, I do note it's the 2019 template, and the gas tax was kind of the 2020 template and had a couple other additions. So just I'm all for this new policy. Yeah. Anyways, that was just the difference between 2019 and 2020.
Okay, and I see Kyle has unmuted himself. Did you want to say something to us, Kyle?
Sorry, I was just clicking buttons.
Okay.
I apologize.
No problem. Thanks. All right, Tara, let's bring up the PowerPoint. All right, and who is speaking to this?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if Tina wanted me to go through some of it as she clicks through some of the slides, and I can give the overview. Mine's a little slow to load. There we go. Legislative requirements of the rural areas grant and aid. This has come up quite a few times. We've done some research with some other municipality or regional districts, say regional districts because they align with us. And basically, it's quite vague how the Local Government Act sections 263 communicates for the rural areas grant and aid. But we've looked at other regional districts and we are aligning with what they are supplying as well. So there's more to it, and maybe some questions around this, and perhaps Sherry can jump in if she knows anything, or Tina, in terms of some of the background of the Local Government Act.
Hey, Tina or Sherry, do you want to give some more background? I think Tina's trying to, Sherry's unmuted. Go ahead, Sherry.
I'll just add that this particular section gives relatively broad authority, but there are other sections within the Act related to apportionment, for example, how we pay for services and the creation of services that may have implications for grant and aid.
Okay. Tina?
Yes, thank you. I was having a hard time unmuting. Apologies. So essentially there is lots of investigation that staff have received. And so we can always bring back a subsequent report to the board if there is more insight seeked on these particular aspects of the Local Government Act. But essentially this is just the main section as to what gives us, the board, the authority to provide these grants of assistance.
Okay. All right, next slide.
So I think this is where these are the three or the 4 bullet points that were outlined within the report that have been identified over the last couple years. And that is to explore 2 intakes related to grant and aid applications, how to address late applications, and of course, the purpose of today's meeting, which is to review the policy and procedures. And essentially the resolution, which we have already engaged the process, which is to establish a social and community services function. So, Chair, as discussed yesterday, maybe these are things which we, as we go along through the policy, we can keep these things in mind and always circle back to this to see whether or not we've addressed these as we've gone forward. Just taking a minute as I press the next slide. Come on. All right. So essentially, this is just to outline the current process, which is the first stage is the intake, which we typically start to advertise. And advertising is a condition of the Local Government Act, and the same with Community Charter, is that in order to allow for everybody to have an equal opportunity, you must advertise. We start this process in February, and the particular deadline is anywhere by the end of March or April. The reviews are done, decisions are then released by May, and then payments are typically done in August when the regional district receives its tax requisition funds. So if anyone wants to discuss any of these, Chair, yeah, I can stop. I'll just keep on rolling through unless you tell me to stop.
Yeah, I'm watching for people to put their hands up. Nobody's got any questions so far.
I only see the president.
Director Hiltz now has got his hand up.
Oh, okay. It was the advertising piece. So this is, the board has unlimited discretion to provide non-business assistance. That's what I understand. In order to provide any kind of assistance, this is a requirement to advertise. So that's in terms of the Local Government Act. We have discretion. We're going to give assistance. The only piece I'm kind of missing is what authority do we have to tax the money? Because I do note that I think the ENF, or no, the GCCPA or whatever, sorry, has a bylaw, and the other ones are noted as services. So I have got some kind of, we seem to have the authority. Do we have the authority to tax in the first place? And the auditors didn't seem to have a worry about this.
Dan?
Yeah, so I think this is where delving into the different types of authority. So per the Local Government Act, the regional district has the ability to provide assistance, and that is generally provided through the general powers. Okay, so we're getting heavy into the legislative part of things here. The one you've identified, so either through, I believe, the community schools and the GGCP, is that services specific to those particular granting functions. So the ability and the framework associated, so the apportionment of costs and all of those types of things, a service was established. So we have a couple of different types of grants of assistance functions with the regional districts. So this is where if you want to provide grants of assistance for a specific purpose, then it triggers all of those things, such as, how you establish a service, how you're going to apportion the cost, who's going to participate. So those are those examples. So whether they're the GGCP or the community schools, the rural grants of aid are through that local government. So under the authority of general government. So it's your general powers. Now, when you want to then get into specifics, so this is where when you start to want to continue to contribute towards something, that's when it triggers those service statements within the Local Government Act. So when you say to unlimited authority, there's unlimited authority if you meet all of these criteria. And so a lot of this criteria is outlined within the policy, which could then be considered procedural. But essentially there are some things that it's not necessarily unlimited, because again, you might have some tax limits. You might, it depends what the purpose is for, duration, etc.
Okay. Director Hiltz, does that answer your question? Okay, good.
Yeah. Discretion with limits, I guess, is what we're saying. But this is one of the few places that we can move money out the door very quickly, whereas we don't have to create a service. It's supposed to be quite a reactive, within a period of months, we can move this money out the door. So it's quite entrepreneur, I'm seeing.
I think this is why you have a clear and transparent process, right? So you have to make sure it's fair and equitable to everyone, that everyone has an equal opportunity. So this is where much discussion has been had, and the rationale for certain language within the existing policy language is, look, you know, we advertise for this, we give the community equal opportunity to have access to this program, and so we assess and distribute the funds equitably. So that's why we say, look, late applications, those are types of things that we want to, because, you know, does that create some inequity with other organizations or community groups? So those are things to be mindful of, and those are the things that have been contemplated in the past. So that is the rationale for making sure it's advertised, everyone has an equal opportunity. You gave everyone the same opportunity to participate. As far as the unlimited, well, you do have limits, because once you establish the pot of funds within the budget process, so that's when we allocate the discretionary amount of money. You do have to establish that. So my interpretation of it is not limitless. You do have some limits on these types of things.
Okay, Director McMahon?
Yeah, you may have this coming up, but I just wanted to get some idea of the volume of applications and how that's has or hasn't changed over the years, and the amount of work for staff in processing the applications and communicating with the applicants.
I don't believe that that's part of the presentation. Can we provide some answers to that then? I don't know if that'd be Tina or Tara.
I'll defer to Tara. I mean, I've got a general sense, but and part of this is in the grant and aid summary that we provide to you, but in that too, there's some applications that don't really qualify. There might be incomplete, or so I'll just pass it off to Tara if she wants to answer that one.
Thank you, Chair. Over the years, the applications have remained fairly static, in and around the average of 50. Not many are turned away based on policy reviews and that kind of thing. Most of them come in, quite acceptable. So there's a change. And sorry, the other question, Director McMahon, was
how much time does it take?
Okay, so in this is the reason why we're doing the stage 1, stage 2 in this presentation, is to kind of give you an idea of the time frame, and the purpose behind that being that if it goes to 2 intakes, it'll be a similar system or similar process for a second intake. So if you can see from stage 1 to, I think it's stage 6, that a lot goes on from, say, February to May. So yes, it is part of the presentation.
Okay. I know it's part of the presentation, but does it indicate how much time it takes?
Thank you, Chair. I think that the timing varies depending on the volume of applications as well as the detail of information that is coming in. There's the reporting that happens in the background, which also takes some time. That's not necessarily part of this process, and perhaps happens some time throughout the year. Writing letters, that's part of this process. It's also included in the review here in the presentation. So it does take a good chunk of time, but it's just part of the work plan.
It's a few weeks. Cumulatively, it's a few weeks of Tara's time and other staff's time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Director Lee.
Yes, thank you. I was trying to figure out, we give money out in grant and aid early to people like the Youth Outreach and the Restorative Justice. Do we need a change to our grant and aid policy to make that line up with the later dates and later money and all that kind of stuff?
I think we'll go through that in the policy itself. There is a line in there that said people can request the funds early if there's a need.
Okay.
Okay.
And do we give the money out earlier too?
I believe we do. Tina, Tara?
Yeah, I think what we have to be mindful of is essentially we're providing money in anticipation of us receiving our tax funds. So there's sort of a cost of borrowing for this. And we sort of base it on need, and that's part of the application process. So my suggestion would be, unless there's a special circumstance and we allow for those people to provide what that special circumstance is, and we address them as their needs are met. So they might have something that's happening in July. So we provide. It's up to the board's discretion too. If you provide them early, that's part of the granting application, and you make a formal resolution to that.
Okay, Director Lee, does that answer your question?
I think the answer is we don't need a change to the policy to continue that practice.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Director Ties?
Yeah, I'm just making sure I'm understanding this correctly. That even if we have a second intake, it would still have to be finished within the calendar year to finish the fiscal. So I'm wondering if there's any way that we can change the requirements or have that second intake so that things happening in springtime between January and April can somehow be covered, but maybe that's not possible.
Tina, do you want to address that one?
So if we want to span fiscals, that's going to add a whole bunch more work in the back end. I'm just wondering what is the business case? So can you provide an example where?
I guess one of them was that the walk for
hospice or something.
Hospice, the walk for hospice that Donna Sugar generally puts on during a time when it's there's a couple of intakes at least a couple of years ago that or a couple of things that came up before we had the proper intake because it happened beforehand. So I'm just wondering if there's ways of covering the whole year rather than just summer and fall.
I think that's where, are those one of the questions I would put back to the committee would be, are these known events? Are they ongoing? Is it more of an education to the community groups to understand when those deadlines are? So we've have similar situations where people are applying for events that might happen in the next year, like early on, like January, February is what you're talking about? And how do we address those types of things?
Yeah, I mean, if it's hugely complicated, let's not bother, but I just thought I'd at least ask the question.
Yeah, so I think those are things where we can try to address them through the policy. So if what you're envisioning is that people would have a fall intake for use in the next fiscal year, I think is what you're contemplating.
Or even in the next 6 months. So basically you've got April to September for the first intake, and then September to April for the second intake or whatever.
Yeah, and so that's just really an accounting exercise, really, because really what you're essentially doing, if you approve something in the fall, you'd have to determine which tax funds. So we can't, in essence, commit to the next year until sort of the financial plan is adopted, but you could potentially do that. So we just have to think about what that would look like. It happens quite rarely. I'm not sure that there's always exceptions to these rules, right? So I think we can always try to figure out a way to meet the needs of the community group, but then make sure that we're not creating a whole bunch of new precedents. So we can contemplate some of that as to how we could meet some of those needs.
It may not be worth the effort. I just wanted to throw it out there.
Well, there's a couple of pieces here that I think you're talking about. One is in our budgeting, do we budget for 2 intakes at the beginning of the year? So, you know, maybe, I'm just gonna pick a number. Say Andreas says, I'm gonna put $10,000 in my grant and aid, and 5,000 of it is gonna be distributed at the first intake, and 5,000 is gonna be distributed at the second intake. So then the budgeting piece is done. It's just the accounting as to when it gets put out. So there's no having to budget for the next year. The other piece that we're seeing on the Sunshine Coast, and this has been a big push by tourism, is to actually extend the season. So we're seeing more and more festivals and events happening in the fringes. And does our current policy take into account those events? The ones that are happening earlier, right, before summer hits? And then, I mean, the ones later typically are covered off, but it's the ones earlier that aren't necessarily captured. I think we're looking at how do we deal with those. Director Hiltz.
Yeah, that's that idea of the sort of the responsiveness is, it's kind of currently the way it's framed. The responsiveness is for the third of the year, and the other 2/3 doesn't really have much coverage. And the only thing I could kind of come up with the existing system is start the intake earlier, January 1st, have decisions by February, but then you have to borrow money, and so the cost of the borrowing would allow that to be spread out more over the year. And there might be work plan issues about when it fits into the work plan, but somehow to have it, it almost feels like what we were trying to do with the budget, to get things done earlier in the year so the money could get out earlier. Seems to be kind of, but it is something that the responsiveness to the timing of when it can be spent in the year.
Okay. No further questions. Did you want to go over the slide on the screen then?
So this is really just the step 2 of how the applications, when received, are then collated for the board for their review. And essentially, if there's any missing pieces, staff will work with the community groups to make sure that we have everything for the board to make a good decision. And essentially, they're distributed out to the rural areas for their review. So essentially, we then have a closed session. And the reason why there's a closed session for review is there's typically a lot of personal information included in some of these applications, etc. So those are done in closed section. And then prior to the directors receive the agenda, they do have their own internal reviews, sometimes with their community members. They might have some community groups that assist them with some of the decision making. And as part of the closed session, there's obviously some alignment with some of the other areas in how these particular groups. So we might have an application for $1,000 and all 5 rural areas pay $200 towards it. So those are the types of contribution discussions that happen. And then resolutions are made as far as the status of the applications. Then these particular recommendations come out in an open session, and the applicants are then notified. And any advice as far as, providing feedback to the community groups on why they may or may not have been successful, or that there's just a restriction on how much funds were able to be distributed, or we have more requests than we have funds to distribute, because that is often the case. And so those types of things are included in the notification letters. And then, yes, typically, unless there has been special consideration to provide funding early, payments are issued on August 1st when the regional district receives its tax funds. And then there is a requirement that the community group report back to the regional district on how they use their funds. We do on occasion get requests from community groups to have a change of use. And sometimes those come back to the board, but if it's really in the same spirit of how they were used, sometimes we'll just deal with the directors that provided the funding and kind of get an operational yes or no. If it's a complete departure, then yeah, there is a requirement in the policy that if they can't use the funds for what they were intended for, that they must return them to the regional district. Essentially the report back is done internally. And I don't believe those are provided back to the board, are they, Tara? I think maybe in a reading file they're provided back.
Thank you, Chair. No, they are not at this time reported back. They come in throughout the year, and some of them come in prior to the next process before somebody makes another application. So it's a little bit sporadic, so it does not come back to the board for their review. But I have them available if anybody wants to take a look.
Director Hiltz.
Thanks. So the expiry of the application of the project seems to be kind of one of these things. Can how long it can go on for, and can another applicant apply while they already have an existing application unspent? So I'm looking at the bursaries. They have a 2-year limit to get it claimed, to have it wrapped up. So is there has it become a problem for staff where things drag and they have to be changed and then it comes back to committee? So should there be an expiry date on these files is kind of what I'm wondering.
Tara?
Well, I think there's 2 parts to that. One is the actual grants, the rural grants of an aid, and then there's the bursary. The bursary we do treat a little bit different because we work with the school district on that. So Tara can speak to that one, but most certainly we have had where we've had to carry over funds. But as far as the grantors themselves, they are expected to use the funds in the year that they have received them, and hence the reporting back. So but once we release the funds, we do lose control in that sense. So there's an expectation they use it by year end, but we can't monitor that or control that.
Tara?
Thank you, Chair. Exactly as Tina has stated, some things may happen in January, February, as we've talked about. Timing of people's events. You can't always guarantee that they're going to fall within the year. And this is where this comes back to the applicants planning and advising applicants of the funds available. So if an applicant said, oh, my event's happening January 2021 and applied for funding in 2020, the funds would go to them, and it would be for them to essentially budget what they were going to budget for prior to the next process. And what the policy, I believe, asks for is that the reporting out is done before an application is made for the next round, so that the funds are at least expended prior to asking for more funds at the next round. As for the bursary question, the school district and I work together to provide the funds, and they provide me a report before the next year funds come available. And if there are left over, and in those 2 years that the student has not accepted the funds, the school district tells us that we still have these funds in our account. So when you send us the next amount for the grant and aid, I just sort of balance it out so that it becomes the actual amount that we give them, but maybe it's a little bit less. And then that comes back to the board to let you know that there was a bit of a variance there.
All right, any further questions before we move on? All right, let's move to the next slide.
Sorry, got a bit of delay on this end. So we've just included some other considerations for the committee's awareness. And, you know, we've already talked about a few of these here already as far as the reporting goes and some of the history compiled. So essentially, if you have any questions on some of this, we're happy to answer them.
Director McMahon?
Yeah, I was just wondering how many late applications we typically get.
It depends from year to year. And I think, you know, yourselves, the directors themselves, I think, are the one who get approached before staff most of the time. And so it really varies from year to year. And, you know, sometimes it's a case of folks not having their applications set or not being aware or emerging issues, or there's an opportunity later in the year. So there's not many because, you know, as Tara mentioned earlier, these are typically the same groups that apply on a year-over-year basis. So I think they're pretty familiar with the process and what's expected and the timelines. So it doesn't happen often. And again, we have options in the policy, but again, being mindful that we aren't providing special circumstances for people to avoid process and not allowing others to come in. So that's, I think, part of the rationale for a second intake.
Director Hiltz?
I want to just come back to that the sort of planning piece. If a group wanted to run an event in January of 2022, they would need to get an application in by April of 2021. They receive money in August. And does anything need to be in there to allow them to spend it, like in the reporting back? That's what I'm saying, is the limit have to be within that fiscal year? Why is it, and can it be carried over as a way to facilitate this kind of out of season application? Like there's a longer lead time in the planning for the organizations. But what's preventing it from being carried over, like a carry forward project almost?
I think we would have to, you know, I don't know if this happens very often. Is there something specific that there's a community group experiencing something like this?
Well, I'm wondering if it's almost kind of, you know, when you don't make the offer, people don't apply. So are we missing kind of, in order to have a more equitable distribution of these granting funds, more people need to be able to participate, not necessarily the same ones over and over again. So this is how do you increase the participation of applications? So this is where if people going, well, my event's always in January or February, well, it's not even worth looking at this place because it has to be done. You don't get the money until August. So are we creating sort of systemic exclusions within the system and preventing groups? And I'm sort of thinking of the groups under $500 limit, right? These are the people who all you need is a bank account with a non-individual name on it, which is not a business, and you can get money sent to you or be sponsored by another group. So that's what I'm wondering, you know, is people are coming to me, well, I got this idea, it's like $300, you know, is this worth applying for? It's are we excluding organizations with the process?
I don't know. I think that might be if we do a second intake and or change the timelines. So as an example, if we solicited for 2021's grant and aid process, we started advertising this month, made those budget decisions in early January. I think that's how you could learn. I personally, I haven't heard of that ourselves, but I don't know if Tara has, or if some of the directors have, but I don't know. I guess we would know if we did something different.
Tara?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of some of these, they have occurred in the past, and this is where late applications have sometimes come in for events that happen late. And again, as Tina said, this doesn't happen very often because we try to do the transparent and equal thing for applicants to make sure that people aren't just going outside the system because, oops, they forgot. But the ones for January, like if they happen into like the first quarter of the year, usually what the policy kind of states is that if you report out before the next process, so you know, the funds are issued on August 1st. If there was a second intake, the funds would be issued on a certain date. With these events and these groups that may happen in January to whatever April the next year, really they've already had the funds from us. So other than us having them reporting back to close the process, you know, the funds have already been expended from our side. So, you know, one consideration in a policy could be that, you know, spend the funds in the first quarter of the following year, or before the first quarter of the following year, or before the next process starts. I mean, I think it says something to that effect within the policy now, but you know, we will be going through the policy, so it might be something to think about for your timelines or the timelines of the policy.
Director McMahon.
Yeah, this is kind of fun because I've applied for these grants over the years from all three local governments for different groups. So I've seen it from both ends now. The irony of the situation is that our process clearly favors longstanding community groups that have predictable needs from year to year, or hold, you know, the same events from year to year. It's more difficult for groups that are meeting, you know, sudden needs or changing circumstances, indeed, to access this. That said, I sure don't want to make it any more complicated than it already is.
All right, seeing no further questions, let's move on to the next slide. All right, so we're going to start getting into the policy itself. So keep in mind, we're going to be looking at three different categories. We're going to look at clauses that are procedural, clauses that actually do belong in the policy, and clauses that potentially should go into a program guide for those applying. All right, so first page, first part of the policy. And if we look at our template, the first thing in our template is purpose. Director McMahon.
Sorry, I've lost my participants window. It went off into another universe somewhere. I do not like the last sentence of 1.1 because I find it patronizing. So, and I feel pretty strongly that organizations are trying to get funding, and to suggest that they're not is, it's basically saying, don't be a freeloader, which is kind of insulting. So I would be much happier taking that out. I think a lot of the other statements elsewhere in the policy cover it off pretty well, what we're looking for. I'd rather phrase things in the positive manner than a negative manner. So, you know, emphasize the positive qualities that we're looking for in applicants rather than say, don't do this and don't do that.
Okay, Director Hiltz.
Yeah, it's a lot of words for me when I start to count the number of words in the sentences. And for me, this purpose, if I can summarize it, is discretionary assistance funded by property value taxation of rural areas. that's kind of what I'm seeing is all these words. So a lot of this stuff like electoral areas belongs in a definition. So for me, it takes away from the message and gets kind of cluttered with detail. So it's for the first, it's a daunting paragraph for the entry into the policy. And there's things like tourism in there, and I'm going, is that an enrichment and quality? It's very ambiguous, but it's a benefit. So somewhere it's the discretionary assistance for community benefit funded by property value taxation. So that's kind of how I boiled it down to. So for me, there's a lot of words.
Okay, so if you look at the board policy template, we've got purpose and scope. So the first part of this, and I'm going to pull it up on my screen here too. So the purpose is to provide grant and aid funding in order to assist nonprofit societies / organizations and registered charitable societies / organizations that provide community tourism or regional benefit and enrichment, enhancing the quality of life for residents. That's the purpose. Okay. Scope. I think that comes in some of the others that are further on. Director Ties, and then Director Hiltz.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering what the process is here. Like right now, we're throwing out suggestions. Do we need formal recommendations, or do we need? How does staff just take our requests and then reconsider it, and then do we pass this at a future board? So I'm not clear on the process right now.
Yeah, neither am I. Good point. Any suggestions? Because Tara's going to have to put this together in the end.
Yeah, so if I could, and I'm gonna, ask Sherry maybe to jump in if I'm off track here. So, I mean, Tara's taking notes. She has excuse me, a track change version that she's keeping track in the back. If we've got some agreement on certain sentiments or structure, then we can include those. I would ask Sherry whether or not we should get formal resolutions, because that might get unwieldy. But if it's best, then it's best. There are also some things too where these are procedural points, and maybe we could, make a note to say this section should be included in either the grant program guide or the procedural application process. Maybe deciphering, because again, so I think one of the items addressed was this thing's too long. Mm-hmm. We want to keep policy to policy and procedure to procedure.
Director McMahon.
Yeah, I think we're doing two things here. We're looking at the content in terms of how the program runs, and then the other part is the organization of all this material and whether it should be in different places. I personally don't want to get too far into the organization, because I think that's something that staff could look at and basically take the content and reorganize it in a rational way and then bring it back. So I would like to stay a little more focused on just what we're going to do with the program.
Okay. Yeah, this just came up yesterday when we looked at, this isn't a policy. This is everything in one. So staff haven't actually had opportunity to go and look at that. So what you'd like to do is go through what's here and see, is the policy part of it correct? And is that where we want to go? Okay. Director Ties and then Director Hiltz.
So I'm wondering if maybe just a motion that staff look at the current policy and separate out the procedural components from the policy. If such a motion like that would suffice, and then we can move on and actually get into what the policy should actually say.
Staff? Yeah, Tara?
Thank you, Chair. In the policy itself, there are sections of policy, which is the ones that I've actually put into the PowerPoint for direction on decision making and directions for staff to assist on accepting applications and the types of applications. Further on in the policy is a section called procedure that goes through some of the process steps. So I think within the 1.0 section is where we would like some direction as to what the committee would like to do for the program itself. The procedure, as you say, can be separated out later, and staff can take a look at that once we figure out what the policy guidelines should be. So that's why we've sort of just broken it down to the 1.0 policy, and hope that we can get some clarity on a few of these items. And if, as we go through, if 1.1, there's changes to 1.1, I can put them down into a recommendation that can be put into a new policy draft to be brought forward at a different time.
Okay. Director Hiltz?
Yeah, so yeah, I'm trying to follow along. So we want, the desire is to take the existing document and have it reformatted and with editorial changes into the new template. Is that the desired outcome that we're going to achieve here?
I think we're looking at achieving that, but then also taking all of the other bits and pieces that have accumulated over the years around procedure, you know, yes, you may apply, but you may not get funding, you know, all of those kinds of things, take them out of the policy and put them into a procedural guide or something for staff, and also a program guide for participants, people who are applying. But it doesn't have to be part of the policy. Sherry?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just want to confirm that what the board could focus on is identifying the policy direction. And then staff can take that away and we can work on how we massage that into the template, and then we will bring it back to you in that form. So try not to, like, the template's not meant, we don't have to fit pieces in that template in this meeting.
Okay.
What we hope to get from the committee is just some direction on the high level policy, and then we can bring it back to you in that form.
Okay, so in 1.1, for example, it talks about assisting nonprofit societies / organizations and registered charitable societies / organizations that provide community tourism or regional benefit and enrichment, enhancing the quality of life for residents. Is that what we're doing? Is there anything missing in there? Doesn't look like it. 1.2, anything in there? Director Hiltz.
Yeah, in 1.1, what I kind of see missing is where some of the things I'm seeing is you get 2 or 3 people together and they say, we want to fix up our neighborhood and we want to generate some funds. So we need someone, we want some startup, some seed money, some credibility from this process. This is, in some ways, this process gives groups credibility. And this about the nonprofit society and organizations, it does seem kind of prescriptive. It doesn't seem very open to me. And that's my issue with the language is it seems to shut down. It doesn't allow for kind of this really grassroots stuff, you know, just to keep a couple of people on the street want to do something, people, and because you need a nonprofit society, you need an organization. So I don't see it as inviting participation, I guess. The language. So for me, it's about benefit to the community, groups that provide benefit to the community, whether that's an NGO but it's not business. So these for me are, yeah.
So go down to number 1.7. What you're saying is some of the language in 1.7 should potentially be included at the beginning, because it talks about requests for $500 or less will be accepted from non-registered organizations / societies / groups.
Yeah, I think this is where there's overlap in the policy, has things in different places. And so, yeah, I think there's something about that 1.7 as well, because from what I can, the requirement to disperse funds is a bank account, not with an individual name. That's an eligibility thing to this whole policy, unless you get a sponsorship through another group. So I'm not sure what the language is, but I'm just feeling it as restrictive and not encouraging of participation.
So what we're saying is there's almost two different groups of organizations that we will give money to. If you're not registered, you're not a non-profit, etc., you still qualify, but you don't qualify for more than $500. But in the first part of the policy, it doesn't actually indicate that. You have to go down further to actually find that. What you'd like to do is see all of that in one place.
Yeah, we should be able to tell if you're eligible for this program in that first sentence, I think. Yeah, something like that.
Okay. Anything else in these first three? Director Hiltz, your hand is still up. Did you have something further? Okay. Seeing nothing further on these three, let's move to the next ones. Director Hiltz.
I'm looking at it's 1.2 on the slide, but it's 1.5 in the policy. The SD 46. I'm a little. This is SD 46 can be an NGO and can apply. So I was a little confused by these were put in as a block at one time. So it's trying to say that the bursary is separate from the other process, I think is what it's trying to say.
Okay. So I guess what the question is should this piece be in here or not? Is this, I mean, do they apply every year, or do we automatically give them the funds every year?
We provide them the funds every year. And so just a little context where we've had community groups ask for funds from the regional districts to then provide bursaries. And, you know, that seems, it was thought in the past, that's a little convoluted because, you know, the funds are actually from the regional district, but they're being positioned as a different entity. So it was, does that look like the only bursaries will be provided through the school district application.
Right, so this could be moved down into 1.10. We don't provide funds for bursaries except for School District 46. Okay. And the other part is procedural, right? Like this is how it's going to be managed. Okay, anything further on these? All right, moving to the next one. Wow, these numberings are wrong, but that's okay. Let's see. No single road grant in aid. So this is 1.7, 1.8, and 1.9. Director McMahon and then Director Hiltz.
Yeah, we have this policy that we don't exceed $5,000, but looking back in the chart, we've exceeded it every year for certain groups. We routinely give out more than $5,000. So it just, I mean, as a rule of thumb, I think it's perfectly good. I just kind of, if we have this policy, why are we not applying it?
Director Hiltz?
Yeah, the amounts is, if I think there is something in the report that there has been this idea of stacking grants from each participating rural area up to $5,000 as a possibility, so a total of 25,000. So I think it's not necessarily clear what the upper limit, the total amount of the grant, if you apportion it between the rural areas. So there's the maximum, and then there's I'm wondering if there needs to be a minimum. Like, do we want people, putting in a grant for $50? Or should there be a minimum, like to kind of say, if you're going to apply for a grant, you need to think of $250 or something more than to give people a kind of where we're interested, or what's the efficiency of allocating money. Is $250 efficient? I don't know. And then there is this idea of the partner, or sometimes called the secondary or the primary applicant, that is tied up in the one of the application guides. It talks about the primary and the secondary applicants opposed to a sponsor. So there was just some language cleanup about this sponsorship aspect of it. So the minimums, the maximums, can we every area put in $5,000, the total 25? I don't know. But that seems to be what it says in some way.
Okay, Director Ties?
Yeah, so further on to Director McMahon's comments, things like the Roberts Creek Community Association routinely requests more than $5,000 through several projects that they've got on the go, and I think our my grant and aid fund is beefed up, probably for mostly for the cause of the Roberts Creek Community Association, because to compensate a little bit for them not having a community hall that's funded by the Sunshine Coast Regional District, but that they're self-funded. So I think that's some of the historical aspects of it. So I would rather. So I don't know if we need to raise the $5,000 or get rid of it altogether and keep it as a guideline, but then I can also see a lot of applications coming in for $10,000, and you're just going, well, now you're just being greedy. But so I see the point, but I also have some reservations about it.
So that so the question that comes out of that is, how long has it been $5,000? Tara, Tina, whoever.
I don't know for sure, but it's been for quite a few years for sure.
Tara?
I had found some reference that it was $1,000 at one time up until I believe it was 2008 or 2010, and then it moved up to 5,000 because some groups needed some extra funding. And to Director Ties' point on the $5,000 and maybe taking out the limit and having groups apply, over the years I've noted that a lot of more groups are requesting the maximum funds of $5,000. So where that would go without a top limit, I'm not certain, but there is quite a few groups that do request the full maximum $5,000.
Okay, Director McMahon, then Director Pratt.
Notwithstanding my points earlier, I'm okay to leave it at 5,000 for now. In the next paragraph, which is 1.8, forthwith is a great word, but it sounds very tally-ho. So perhaps as soon as possible would be a slightly better phrase. And the next paragraph, which is 1.9, is the second sentence isn't a sentence. So yeah, it needs a verb or it needs to be fixed.
Yeah, it's two incomplete sentences that are in the paragraph. Yes. Director Pratt.
Thanks. I would agree with Director McMahon. I'm happy with the amounts staying as 5,000 and then the other one for 500. I know we may have a lot of requests for the maximum amount, but I'm also very cognizant that this is, you know, it is taxpayer funds, and it would mean that I think in the long run that we would have to increase our entire each area's grant and aid funding, and I'm happy with the 5,000 max.
Okay, Director Hiltz and then Director Ties.
So the 5,000 max applies to like an application, a project application, not, you know, one applicant could have several applications through the year, but it's the application total amount. Is that what we're talking about, is the $5,000? That's what I'm not clear if it's the application amount or the contribution amounts from each area. And the other one is we're told that the SERD is a funder and not a sponsor. So a little bit of language. We're a funding organization opposed to a sponsorship organization, and it says SERD as a sponsor. You know, I'm not sure if these are important words or not, but I do note in the report that it did say SERD as funder, not as sponsor. So just lining up with the report.
Thank you. Director Ties.
Yeah, so along that same vein, yeah, I'm okay with $5,000 per project to not discourage prolific organizations that you know really put a lot of effort into their community and have several projects on the go.
Okay, devil's advocate. So if somebody's putting on a bigger event that involves the whole Sunshine Coast, what we're basically saying is, if you're involving the whole Sunshine Coast, you apply to every government for funding in order to get support. I'm okay with that, but that also means that we need to recognize these are small volunteer organizations. And on the flip side, we probably want to try and make it as easy as possible for them to apply to all the organizations. So whatever we can do to harmonize applications, for example, so we don't have volunteer burnout to get their $15,000 or whatever it is that they need to do these applications. Director Hiltz. You're still muted. Thank you.
I mishanded myself. Sorry, I forgot to take my hand down. Apologies.
Okay. All right, so we're good with this, Tina?
Well, I want just clarity, and maybe it's just me. So what I'm hearing is that we want to keep the $5,000. However, we want to potentially change some language to per project, because that means we could have entities, the same entity apply for 3 projects and they would receive $15,000. Is that what I'm hearing? You want to modify some language to that effect?
Directors?
That'd be a yes for me. The RCCA being a good example.
Okay, Director Pratt. I think what the directors are saying is, when they first read this, they weren't clear whether or not it was somebody was applying and from their rural area funding pot, they would give $5,000 to that. So the total was $25,000. What they're looking at is, how do we put the verbiage in here to indicate that the maximum they can get is $5,000, and that could be $1,000 from each. It could be split up differently, but it's 5,000 is what the maximum is. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I'm struggling because while I want clarity, I also like having wiggle room.
Director Pratt.
As Donna puts it so succinctly, that's true. I'm clear that as long as it's, I'm clear that it's a full $5,000 amount, that it's not $5,000 per area. So that wasn't an issue for me, Chair. I don't know, the per society or per group, as our CFO was just asking for clarity on. So for example, as Director Tai said, you know, if he's with having one society apply for 3 different projects in the same stream, or in the same intake, I'm okay with that, because if they've got 3 different worthwhile projects or things going on, and then we can debate that as that comes up, and look at the worthiness of those applications. So I'm okay with having one organization apply for. I'm so sorry. I'm kitten sitting apparently today, but. So I'm okay as in having one organization with multiple, as long as they're distinctive projects or events or something, and then we can make the decision as we have them in front of us.
So it would be something like an organization may apply for up to $5,000 per project. About $5,000 per project or something.
Per project, per event. That's where I'm leaning. It gives us that wiggle room, as Director McMahon said, but also at the same time, we can still decide how we want to deal with that as it comes in front of us.
Okay, Director Hills.
I'll take my hand down first. So yeah, for me, the idea of focusing on the project, I think helps to put some scope around what these things, like in the past, I would say that volleyballs were not a project, you know, in terms of it's about, so the 5,000, and I think it does encourage groups. If you had one group in say Seashell or say Half Moon Bay wanted to put on an event that was coast-wide, each one of them could in theory apply and pool their funds to pull off something larger than any one of them could. So I think it does encourage that kind of partnership stakeholder. It incentivizes that and to reach out. So I think that's where I am. Yeah, per project, multiple groups can apply for multiple projects. I do wonder if you would want to put a limit, say 3 per intake or 2 per intake, or maybe not 20 per intake. You know, this idea of limits, and can one group start to dominate this cycle? So again, it's the limits, 2 or 3 per intake.
I don't think that needs to be part of the application or this piece, because that'll come in the adjudication. You can say we've got, you know, 10 applications from this one group. You know, maybe we're not going to fund all of them, but that will be then part of the adjudication.
That's where our discretion lies.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Director Pratt.
And it's a good point, because I mean, if we all, you know, we've all been part of volunteer organizations, and we've all watched as as the volunteers kind of the life cycle of an organization. In some years, you're going to have a very dynamic, very you know, you're going to have an organization that has a lot of projects on the go that they want to get going right away. And in other years, there's going to be organizations that don't have quite the same capacity to be going and doing more. So I think you're going to see that ebb and flow within different, we've all seen this in the volunteer organizations we've been part of, that some years there's like a bunch of projects, there's a lot of people available to make these projects or these events happen, or there might be, you know, the larger community need for a whole bunch of things happening in one year. and other years it may not be as much. So limiting it, I don't see the need to limit. As Chair said, it's the adjudication process. As we discuss this, we'll sort that out.
Okay, anything further on these 3 points? Seeing nothing, let's move to the next slide.
Sorry, Chair, I did have one question, which I'm not sure got clarified, and that is whether or not if there is one project, whether or not the rural areas could stack. That I don't know if we clarified that one, or if essentially 5,000 per project really addresses that. Maybe it does.
I'm seeing nods.
Okay, perfect.
Addresses that, yes.
Good.
All right, Director McMahon.
Yeah, I thought I'd start at the bottom with the least important item, but I had to look up what a tag day is. I'd never heard of it before. Yeah, I just think we need some better wording around that. So actually, it might be sufficient just to say nonprofit societies operating at a provincial or federal level. I sort of get what this is about, but I'm a little foggy on it.
I have no idea. I don't know what a tag day is. Can staff know what it is?
I do. I can answer that if you'd like. So, for example, it's something that's commonly done by the cadet organizations. So either the Navy League, the Air Cadets, or the Army Cadets, and they're what they do essentially is it's a fundraising thing for them. So they're essentially asking for donations for and giving like a sticker or a tag. So it's a fundraising event for those organizations. So
would that be covered off under annual fundraising campaigns?
No, I would actually put it explicitly in there. So I mean, I'm fine with leaving it in there.
Okay, Director McMahon.
What about saying nonprofit societies conducting provincial or federal fundraising campaigns? Because what we're trying to get at here is we're trying to meet local needs.
Okay, Director Toth.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was not directly addressing Director McMahon's question there, but any nonprofit society that's going through this paperwork and sees, tag days, mail outs, door-to-door campaigns is going to know immediately that they're not going to be eligible. And so I don't know if that last line is necessarily in the director's interest so much as it is the organizations. The organizations applying are going to know exactly what their, tag days or Apple Day or, whatever their campaign might be is in terms of that.
Okay, Director Hiltz.
Yeah, so my take on that sentence is the funding from the regional district is not to be refunded again. This is it needs to be a primary use, and fundraising is not a primary use of the funds. It's a secondary use. So that's how I interpret that is use it for the project. Don't take the money and go and find another project that this is about delegating. You can't delegate the funding to someone else.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and if you actually look at the policy as it is, if you go down further and you get into 1.18, it talks about what the funds can be used for. Personally, I would rather start with that. This is what you can use the funds for. And then these are the things we will not fund. Director Hiltz.
Totally agree. It's what's in, what's eligible, not what's out. Yeah. Yeah. More guidance on what's in.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I look at it and going, own property. This is on 10.1 improvements to own property. Well, I've allocated funds to community associations to put in a stove, which is own property. So yeah, it's more about how to use it and less about maybe, yeah, more help on how to, what's eligible.
Okay, Director McMahon?
Yes, actually, Director Hilt hit it there. We just gave some money, I think, to fix the Heritage Playhouse Theater. So obviously we're not following that first bullet point. The other two that I have some issues with are the fire suppression, life and emergency safety equipment, which I think merits a discussion because it's come up every year. And the remuneration part, because that's another one that's a little dicey. I know it's intended not to go to regular salaries and wages, but a lot of organizations do in fact give their, they can't do things without reimbursing somebody, at least, you know, partially. So difficult.
Director Hills?
Yeah, for me, the one that summarizes is that local government is not allowed to provide assistance to businesses in that institutional and commercial stuff. But yeah, I agree with Director McMahon. Like if you're putting on a festival, you need bodies to do the work. So it sometimes seems a little over prescriptive about how the money can be spent, opposed to saying, we believe in this event. It seems more like micromanaging, but for me, it's as long as you have the not providing assistance to business, then you don't have to have the wages kind of thing in there. That's sort of how I'm seeing it. It just seems overly prescriptive. In terms of the fire suppression, I touch in with 2.3, which talks about exposure to unacceptable liability. So I see there's a connection between the discretion that the board or the electoral area directors have, and they cannot expose the regional district to unacceptable liability. So whether that's for the deliberation, which might be, so I just see them at kind of cross purposes. And it'd be nice to kind of harmonize that 1.10 and that 2.3.
Okay, Director Ties, then Director McMahon.
Yeah, I think the remuneration one is sort of a gray area for me as well. I don't, you know, you're not allowed to do wages, salaries, and other fees, but we've accepted honoraria in recent applications. So I don't know how many different words you can come up with, but essentially, you know, whether you're supporting the artist or doing those kind of things, it all ends up in a bit of a gray area. And so I don't know if there's a solution to that, whether we just say not at all, or whether we, you know, where does helping support artists end, and where do wages start?
Okay, Director McMahon, and Director Hills.
Yeah, on the emergency equipment here, this is one of the things I don't really like about a sort of a liability approach, is that doing nothing is allowed. So if people die because there's no life-saving equipment, that's okay. But providing life-saving equipment that might malfunction is not okay. And you know, it comes down to what is the definition of acceptable risk. We have these little teeny tiny volunteer fire brigades on the islands, and they have limited sources of funding, and I don't really have a problem with providing some sorts of equipment, depending on what they're looking at. So
Okay, Director Hiltz.
And for me, in part, what this section is about the information that we have to evaluate the projects for the community benefit. So I think this is in part where the application needs to, for me, my job is to evaluate the community benefit here, not whether it goes to wages or printing cardboard or tickets or cotton candy. I don't think that's really my job. It's what is the community benefit? So I think part of these things can be answered in clearer application from the applicants on how they describe the benefit to the community. So I think that more latitude for the organizations to describe the benefit for us as a board to evaluate, rather than wages, or is it life suppression? I don't know, but we did, yeah. So that's where I am. Better applications from the applicants on describing the benefits to the community, opposed to all the smaller bits in here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. And I think on this particular one, a lot of information has been provided as to some of the rationale for these types of things. And sometimes this might not be the avenue to support those community groups. There might be different ways to meet some of these needs, whether they're things like emergency preparedness equipment or fire suppression equipment. So it's not, this might just not be the right tool to contemplate these types of things. So it most certainly can be, there might be different ways to meet those community needs that don't put the regional district at risk. So I think if there's a desire to explore this further, we can definitely bring this back.
It almost looks like this category, this item here, was put together in response to applications that came forward and say, well, no, we're not going to, cover that. No, we're not going to cover that. And it's gotten away from the general to the very specific. What you're saying here is they will not be approved for organizations that primarily serve their membership, personal benefit, individuals, industrial, commercial, business undertakings, and then capital, right? I mean, I think we can look at combining some of this and make it a little more generic so that, because this is going to come after what we do, right? This is what we do. This is what we don't do. It's not capital. It's not organizations that only serve their own members, etc. So I think staff can work with some of that. Director Beamish and then Director McMahon.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm observing this interested because we go through this every year ourselves, as we all do, and try to refine our projects. And some of the things we look at, our list is different than yours, although our policy provides for people offering service to citizens of Gibsons and or the Sunshine Coast. So we're broad in our policy. In terms of what we do, we're much more limited in our funds. Our maximum, we put $25,000, I think, in grant of aid funds, and the maximum grant can be 10% of that. So there are different things we look at. But some of the things on this list here, for example, remuneration, we don't spell that out, but we do support youth. So if somebody was hiring a youth to do a project, we would support that. Students, for example. Non-profit societies operate at a regional level. Well, that's hospice. We do support hospice. It's because they operate regionally. But your policy, and I know you do support them as well, but some may not apply because they don't think that they would be responsive. Our section there just reads, we do support provincial or federal level organizations conducting fundraising. So that. Just that. So we have a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. And I'm interested because very often, if it doesn't fit your category, it might fit our category. So people come to us for other funding, but we have a much more limited amount. Where we have found more recently, where we are providing funds to the same organization year after year after year, we try to make them line items in the budget. And we did that recently for seniors, for example, and seniors hall. So I don't want to intrude in your conversation, but I'm very interested because it's one pot of taxpayer dollars we're dealing with across the coast here, and we do have a lot of overlap on that. So it's interesting to see the different policy approaches. So thank you.
Okay, Director McMahon.
Yeah, I agree that we're almost getting into the criteria for making decisions rather than making it clear to the applicants what is not acceptable. So I personally would be happy with just paring it down to the point about personal benefit, that paragraph there. Then the next one could be religious or ethnocultural organizations serving primarily their membership. Annual fundraising campaigns, endowment funds, and then maybe just leave it right there. And unless somebody wanted to flag provincial or federal fundraising campaigns, but that actually comes under fundraising campaigns. So that might be sufficient to provide enough direction to applicants, but not get too far into the weeds.
The other one that you might want to still include is maybe large capital costs, not just capital costs, but large capital costs for equipment. So somebody, I'm thinking Cooper's Green. Would grant and aid go towards Cooper's Green? Right? Large capital maybe large capital expenditures or something might not be used towards that. Something around that, so that groups that are looking at doing big projects like that aren't necessarily coming to grant and aid for funding towards those. Director Hiltz.
The only issue I had with the capital one is the owned property. I think the idea is that it's not private property. If it's a community-owned nonprofit that owns the facility, then it's eligible. So I think it's almost missing the just the private property side of that. Is if they need to do repairs or if that's a capital cost, and maybe it should just not have cap. I'm not sure about the capital because it's mostly they're coming for repairs and replacement. Seems to be not building new buildings. But the key point is that it's not private property. And in terms of the other ones, taking I have some discomfort with the religious and ethnoculture organizations rather than just saying any organization primarily serving their membership, whether that's whatever that group is. I don't think separating out religious and ethnocultural is improves it. It's any organization that is self-funded and a membership driven seems to be. So it just a way to reduce the number of words and yeah, I'll stop.
Okay, I'm going to go to Tina and then Director McMahon.
Very briefly, Chair, just realizing that grants and aid cannot be used if there is an established service. So you can't raise funds from here if you already have a service providing funding towards that. So Cooper's Green, we would not be able to do that. Or Sprock Kids was one where they came through grants and aid, and we were like, well, that's a parks related function, a project on a parks related asset. So no, we can't provide grants of assistance for that. So.
Okay. Director McMahon.
Yeah, while I sympathize with Director Hilt's point about membership organizations, the thing is that, like I've applied for the Film Society, and so it is a membership-based organization. On the other hand, anybody on the Sunshine Coast over 18 can be a member, whereas I can't be Filipino. It's not going to work. So, and you know, in theory, I could join every church on the Sunshine Coast, but in practice, I'm probably not going to. So there are different kinds of groups. The other thing I I really agree about the privately owned property, and I think that we should specify that. There are, in fact, several nonprofit groups that have used grant money to improve privately owned property, and I have a problem with using tax dollars to improve property that people own in their own name. So, yeah.
Okay. Anything further on this page? Tina? Okay, nope, okay. Nothing further on this page. Let's go to the next. Director Hiltz? Oh, we can't hear you.
Forgive me. It'd be 1 point, an easy one for me is the 1.2 FOI, which is the 1.12.
Yep.
And also ties in with 4.3. It's also talking about a little, it mentions personal information in there. So there's something that needs to be, it's a different place, the personal information use. So just, that's an easy one for me.
Okay, anything else in here? Director McMahon?
Sure. 1.13 is a little harsh. I would say, and this, it's probably in the wrong place too, because this is more a procedure than anything, but applications should detail how they contribute to the general interest and advantage of the rural areas. Those applications that have a measurable benefit to communities outside the rural areas should, I don't say are required to, that's pretty heavy, should apply to municipal grants and assistance programs.
Mm-hmm.
And leave it there.
Right, but as you said, this isn't necessarily in the policy. This would move out into a program guide or procedural piece anyway. Okay, Director Hiltz?
I've got 1.5, which is 1.15, that it's a competitive process. Again, doesn't seem to be a policy piece. It's for me, it ties back to the purpose in that the discretionary is a limited fund. So that's for me is that there's something in here about just because you get it this year doesn't mean you're going to get it forever. So this idea that there's a limited fund and it's discretionary each year. So yeah, but for me, the having a good, competent description of the benefits, and for me, the benefit is also the area, because what I've seen some applicants say going, well, this benefits everyone on the coast, and they check all the boxes, opposed to this happens only on area F, and they check area F. So I kind of get confused about the benefiting area versus where the project is actually located. And I just tie this back to our budget processes. Our budget status sheet talks about where the project is located, and which is often the area that receives the greatest benefit. So it's just, yeah, 1.5 out.
Okay. Anything further on this page? I think staff will look at this again regarding policy and program and separate stuff out. Next one. Director Hiltz. Right. Now this is where we would talk about whether or not you want to have 2 intakes. Director McMahon.
I'm sort of leaning towards 2 intakes for the transparency. because as was pointed out, not many groups are aware that you can get a grant out of the usual process. It tends to be that somebody talks to a director and the director says, oh, hey, did you know that you can put in a late application? On the other hand, I wouldn't want to make a lot more work for staff. I do know that the Gibson's second intake is not heavily subscribed. They tend to get the majority of their applications in the first intake.
Okay, Director Hiltz and then Director Beamish.
I'm not really heading in the multiple intakes. Is when another regional district used to have continuous intakes, and then they went to 2, and then they said, well, what about in an election year? Do you want to be making these decisions during an election cycle? So, and the amount of work that staff needs to do. So I think for me, it's still hit it hard in that one time with the best possible information, and at this point, and the ability of organizations to spend before the next round of intake or the next award helps to deal with that non-funded schedule part that we're dealing with, that January to August portion.
Okay, Director Beamish.
Yeah, we went to a second intake for 2 reasons. One was to deal with emerging issues, those issues that organizations just hadn't anticipated coming up, but also because we found that our first intake was not fully subscribed, so that we had money left, and we said, well, we just don't want to carry over grant and aid money, so let's give a second opportunity for grant and aid applications. So that's why we went to the second. That was back in my time when I was CIO. We did that, and it's served all the time. Every year there is somebody who comes forward for that second intake.
Okay. So further to Director McMahon, is it that we are looking at finding some way to deal with those emerging events that come up, or emerging issues? We want to put something in for that, Director Hiltz?
For me, the late application is still there. It's still in the policy, and the regional district, in terms of the allocation, usually we're overprescribed to by 50 to 100% in the first intake. So essentially all the money is gone in the first intake. There's never been an under subscription to the program at this point, from what I can see.
Okay, Director McMahon and Director Hiltz, or Director Pratt after that.
Yeah, I do think we need a way to address the emerging issues, whether that's through late applications or through a second intake. And you know, I could go either way, but I do know that things arise. The Streamkeepers group is a good example. They're pretty new. They don't know the ropes. They've got a lot of projects. Some of them are coming up suddenly. They're urgent, whatever. So there does need to be an avenue for dealing with that.
Okay, Director Pratt.
I am not in favor of a second intake. Clarifying late/emergent intake or applications, having a stricter guideline around that would work for me. Honestly, what we're doing right now is something comes forward and staff brings it to our attention works for me. It's just clarifying that out for the groups, but definitely I am not in support of a second intake at this time.
Okay, Director Lee.
And basically would like to echo what Laurie just said. I believe that exceptional circumstances covers it, and that would include changes in the economy and things like that cause it. But no, I'm not in favor. Maybe clarify what exceptional circumstances are, but otherwise I'm happy with how it's working.
So maybe that sentence should be changed Applications arriving after the announced application deadline will be accepted in exceptional circumstances only. To say something about applications may be considered late applications, or applications after the deadline may be considered for in exceptional circumstances or for emerging issues or something. And that applications only received from nonprofit societies and organizations. We've already said that. That's duplication. Go to Tina, and then Andreas, and then Lori.
Just a question for consideration would be, you know, if we do add a little more information as to, you know, timing of, you know, the who, what, where, and how late applications can be made, to Director McMahon's point, to, you know, again, try to make it as fair, open, and transparent for folks. So we give everybody sort of the equal opportunity. Another thing that can sometimes be a challenge is if we receive, say, one a month, or, you know, all sorts of timing, it's a little bit more challenging to address it. So maybe we could put some context, more context and structure to both help the community groups and internally for staff resourcing if we don't choose to go to a second intake.
Okay. Director Ties, Director Pratt, and Director McMahon.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if it's something like a little bit of a hybrid model could be adopted, where we don't have a formal second intake, but that we reserve some of the funds. And I don't know if we need to do that formally, or we can just say, well, 20% of our funds are going to be held in reserve. And so we basically, on the first intake, give ourselves a bit of a limit. But so I think that could be something that could be considered. I don't know if we need to formalize that.
Okay, Director Tina, you're back in there again.
I actually lowered it,
Okay.
but maybe to Director Ty's point is sometimes just considering that sometimes your needs, you have ebbs and flows. And I think that my observation with directors is they sometimes do that naturally, and it gives you the flexibility without being too prescriptive. So just being mindful of trying to put a limit on it. Again, back to that point where you're providing direction, but you're nimble.
Let's go to Dean.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just regarding the idea of holding back an amount of the amount available, like 20%. One of the considerations, and I'm not saying I'm not for or against this in any way. One of the considerations is when you hold back an amount arbitrarily, sometimes what you've accidentally done is you've taken some groups that are completely ready with good projects that are applying at the right time at the first intake, and you're saying no to some of their projects while you wait for something that may or may not occur later in the year. And it's just an area to consider.
Okay, Director Pratt, Director McMahon.
Okay, so I'll make a suggestion that we take out that second sentence of the first paragraph and add a separate bullet point in that actually deals with late applications, and have it say something along the lines of late applications will be considered on something along the lines of on an emergent or on an, I want to say as needed, that's not the proper wording, and as funds, and may be awarded if funds are available. Something along those lines.
Okay. Director McMahon, I think people are weighing in on this.
Yeah, no, I think we're going in the right direction here. I'm pretty happy. The only thing about late applications is that sometimes you have very little time left if they're supposed to expend the funds by December the 31st. So I don't know if we can just deal with that informally, that late applications could get a kind of a deadline extension or something like that to spend the money. It's my only comment.
They don't have to spend the money by the end of the year.
I thought they did.
No.
I saw that somewhere. All right.
Well, maybe it is in there, but they have to report back if they want funds in the next one. They have to report back before they apply, which means March or April of the following year. Director Hiltz?
In terms of the holdback, yeah, I think that needs to stick with the directors. Each individual if they have knowledge about something coming up, they can hold that as discretion. But for me, the transparency is everyone up front, and for me to have to decide how much to hold back without knowing something. So I would hold back if I knew something was coming. But other than that, it's put your best foot forward at the first as best you can. And there's always if it's all gone in the first round, there's nothing left. So it's all pending budgetary funding availability. So for me, it's again, and leave it with the discretion of the directors to hold back what they know might be coming in the future.
Okay, we are moving into what grants can be given for. I would suggest a 5-minute break. Get everybody up, standing, stretching, washrooms and stuff, and then we'll come back. You okay with that? 10 minutes, Leonard's saying? Are you okay with 10 minutes?
Yeah, 10 minutes gives me time to make a cup of coffee.
Okay, so it's 11:22, 11:32, just past 11:30. All right, see you then. Thank you and welcome back. We are moving on to what we will be using grant and aid funds for. So Director McMahon, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think this is much too prescriptive, so I'm going to make a suggestion and then you can see if you like it. I would suggest that we delete A, B, and D, that we edit C. We don't have to repeat what the electoral areas are. That was back at the beginning of the policy. And we might consider adding one more bullet point under C that would address multiple sources of funding and in-kind contribution.
Okay, so when you said A, B, and was it D or E?
D.
D.
I thought E is quite reasonable, that, you know, we should consider the track record of organizations in the community.
Okay, Director Hiltz.
Is it all right to steal kind of the language from the district of Seashelt's evaluation criteria? They seem to be pretty succinct from what and seems to cover the same material.
Okay, so you mean like number 4, the eligibility piece?
No, the number 6, the evaluation criteria, seems to be the preference. In district of Seashelt language, it's called evaluation criteria. In SCRD, it's called preference.
Okay. So what it says is evidence 6.1 is evidence of community needs or desire for proposed program, project, service, or event. Point 2, potential benefit, in this case to the residents of the district of Seashelt. 3, evidence of community partnerships or support, financial or in kind. Next one is capacity to deliver the proposed program, project, service, or event. 5 is level of volunteer involvement. 6, evidence of financial need. 7, evidence of funding from other sources. 8, ability to demonstrate or anticipate future outcomes. And 9, public accessibility. Director Hiltz? You okay with that? Director McMahon?
Actually, that's a pretty good list. The only thing I think, it's pretty much the same, but I like the word collaboration that's in ours, because that's part of our strategic plan. So groups that collaborate with other groups in the community that's a good thing.
Okay. Okay. Director Hiltz?
I'd even shorten that just to, the new phrase is just working together with other groups, right? Whether you collaborate, you coordinate, cooperate, whatever, as long as you're working together somehow, that seems to be the catchphrase. So whether it can be simplified.
Okay. Anything else?
Sure. So in terms of, for me as an elected, when I'm evaluating these, the evaluation criteria help me kind of to score, I guess, what I'm trying to do in terms of weighing whether this project is more of a benefit than this benefit, and how much or this project's benefit. So if it could be incorporated into kind of how staff vets the applications, that and I think they do already, but they use categories like arts and culture, and I don't find the categories as useful as kind of more of the evaluation criteria.
Okay, Director McMahon.
Yeah, I don't have the Seashelt material in front of me, though I like the sound of it, but I just wanted to make sure that it included the track record of the organization in the community, because I do think that's important. Organizations that are brand new and you don't know anything about them, it's hard to evaluate. So
So the one, I think this would tie to that capacity to deliver the proposed program, project, service, or event. That would tie into, you know, have they done it before? And maybe if it's something new, who's part of the group? This came up in one of the ones we just did at ICE-T, for example. Totally new program that came forward to the board to evaluate, but they looked at who made up the group and said, well, these guys have expertise in this area. These guys have expertise in this area. It's a totally new initiative, but knowing who makes up the group, we know that they've got the capacity to carry this out. So we're in support or not, right? That's the kind of thing that came in as part of that. So that would be capacity to deliver the proposed program, project, service, or event. They've done it before. They've got the people lined up to do a new one, you know, that kind of stuff. Okay. Anything further on here? All right, moving on to next. So this is almost all, except that they have to report out. They have to report back. Otherwise, everything else on here is pretty much operational. Director McMahon and then Director Hiltz.
Yes, it is operational. The only question I had is in 1.2. Oh, look, we've got the right numbers. 1.23, applicants must have a working set of rules and regulations. I didn't know what that means. Is that bylaws? Is that any incorporated nonprofit has bylaws? They have to.
Yeah.
So it didn't make any sense to me. I don't know really how anybody would demonstrate it if they were an unincorporated group. So I'm inclined to skip it and just say the bank account, because if they can get the bank account, then they probably have the other bits.
Right. Director Hiltz.
Yeah, agreement on the working rules. Yeah, it doesn't seems a little bit prescriptive. But I am looking at the application information, and it does seem kind of weighty to me when I've participated in filling out these things. We go, the organization first says, do we even have a financial statement? You know, do we have a budget? So it almost, for me, it's about focusing on the project budget. That's what I want to see, more information about the project, and the other pieces about the capacity of the organization to deliver the program are in those supplemental information. But for me, it's about evaluating the program, the project, and so I'm not sure if that, it says detailed project, and for me, that's the most important piece, is something, a nice template that they all follow, which has a budget that with these layout things. And I'm not sure how much, I don't think there has to be a lot of detail. Because for me, it's more about those evaluation criteria, about evaluating the benefit to the community. So latest financial statement, I don't know. Annual report, I don't know. And if you're doing it under $500, or if you're doing 5,000, you know, maybe there's a difference in there. Maybe this is for only, I don't know, everyone needs a budget. So we know how the money is going to be spent to be accountable. But all the other stuff just seems kind of a lot. What does Seashell ask for, actually?
So the financial statements, stream keepers. Donna, speak to stream keepers. Which of these would they have? And if they're looking at $400, do they have it? Like, do they have these pieces?
Well, actually, Streamkeepers is not a good example because they are an incorporated group.
Okay.
So any incorporated group should have financial statements. Yes. I don't care. And for an incorporated group, I expect to see their financial statement.
Yeah.
An annual report, I don't know about that because most don't have that. But for smaller groups, I think we should tell people to include it, but not use the word must, because of course that would eliminate people who could not produce this. So for the smaller grants, we're going to be flexible. But I would, for any long-standing group, I would expect to see their financial statement.
Right, Tina?
Yeah, I think this is a few of the points that I was going to raise have already been mentioned. I think that, you know, with smaller groups, we don't necessarily receive all of this information, but they do provide more detailed budgets or sort of an accounting of how they see. I think, yes, with the bigger groups, we definitely want, I'd encourage to keep those financial statements, because sometimes you learn some things about the organization. They may not be as financially constrained. It can also see where different sources of money, maybe from the same application, are being funded from. And those are things that have arisen as questions and part of the evaluation. So this is where I don't think we can look at maybe some of the words that were put from a must, maybe just change the language a little bit depending on the size and complexity of the organization. Because for those larger, more sophisticated one, I definitely would recommend we get more disclosure than less.
And this wouldn't necessarily need to be in the policy then. This would be in more the procedural kinds of stuff. Could we, to Donna's point, could we have two different categories, one for, you know, the 500 grant versus the 5,000 grant? Or do we want to even spell that out, just take out the must and then that covers it? You guys, Tara, you have to actually manage this, so.
Thank you, Chair. If we take out the application form must be used, we do need the application form to be used. We don't want them, so that should stay, and accompanied maybe where possible by the additional information. What's happened over time is people that have repeated applications can tend to not check the lists off and just put in applications because they don't see where it's necessary. And some of these are larger organizations, and in cases of smaller ones, as others have mentioned already, when I go through the list, I'm not, you know, oh, they didn't give a financial statement, or we throw them back or whatever and get that. So, you know, we use whatever we can when we accept the applications for that criteria. So it isn't necessarily a must. And again, we can add where applicable or where possible.
Okay, Director Beamish?
Yeah, our application requires the financial assistance statement and business plan for applications over $1,000. So under that, they don't have to provide that. And then even if they don't provide it, they can provide the statement as to why it's not available if it's not there. So just leaves that opening for them.
Okay. Anything further on any of these? Director Hills?
1.20 seems kind of more procedural. If it's not complete, you don't get to, it's not done. You got to fill in the form. Mm-hmm. So it seems, I don't think that's really policy if you, more procedures.
Well, even 1.21 in the application form, it says, you know, explain how your project will benefit either local or regional communities. So it doesn't have to be part of this. Most of these don't have to be in here in the policy.
Yeah, and again, for me, this is the completeness of the application allows the eligibility evaluation criteria to happen more easily. So yeah, and for me, of the must, you must have a summary, and everything else is build your application to a complete and competitive application is all the other stuff. Mm-hmm. But so even just reprioritizing, because you know, local or nonprofits that I see, they look at that list and they just shut down as soon as they see that word. So if they put the project at the top and they see that first, and the other stuff, it might be more encouraging, less bureaucratic. Mm-hmm.
I can remember one of our applications that came forward one time. It was from a fairly well-established group, and they provided their financial statements, and they had substantial funds set aside. Could have very easily have covered off what they were requesting funds for. So they had the financial statements there. So one of the questions that was asked was, you know, you have these funds there. Why are you asking for this when you actually have the funds to cover it off? And so they laid out for us what their plans were, and they had some pretty aggressive building plans for, you know, like the next year and the year after, that these funds have been accumulated to do. So, you know, fine, we gave them the money, but they actually, the financial statements actually had us be accountable for how we were giving out funds based on what they showed us. Right, anything else on any of these? All right, that takes us to end of section 1. All right, section 2, reason for policy.
Yeah, this can be, you know, staff can frame this stuff too as we start to draft the new policy. So
yep.
Unless there's anything anyone wants to make sure is incorporated.
Seeing shaking heads. All right, move on to the next one, authority to act. Was that it? We're not going into the rest of it?
Sorry, I'm having a glitch. I don't know what's going on.
That's fine.
Chair, the authority to act was kind of at the beginning when we talked about the legislation and that kind of thing. So, and then the rest of it goes into procedure. So we've discussed that as well. So that was it for the policy.
Okay, so let's go back up to the report and look at those items that were listed. So 2 intakes per year we've covered off. Late applications we've covered off. The policy and process review, including application documents, looks like we've given staff direction to go away and deal with that. The effect on rural areas grant and aid if a social and community services function is to be considered has not been discussed. Director McMahon.
Yeah, thanks. I did want to flag that because I went back and looked at all the different funding pots that we pull money from for some of these groups, and it really is kind of a dog's breakfast. Well, okay, I can't use that term. It looks like it has accreted historically. And so we've got some sort of odd situations. My initial take was that the kind of things that would be moved to social services function would be community schools, youth outreach programs, police-based victim services, restorative justice, and seniors planning table. That was the immediate ones that struck me. And then once we've discussed that, I'd like to talk about these E and F funds.
Okay, Tina?
One of the things we'll have to be mindful of is if we already have an established service for a purpose, you know, we'll have to consult with the ministry if we want to move that to a different purpose. We may or may not be able to do that. So that'll be part of the feasibility in establishing the new service.
Follow up, Director McMahon?
Yeah, but for instance, if I understand this correctly, youth programs and community schools are being funded through regional recreation. And to me, it makes much more sense for them to be in the social services department.
Okay. Director Hills.
In terms of the social service topic, for me, what I'm seeing is that there's kind of the social and community services are more of a regional service that everyone's putting into, whereas the rural grants and aid are quite targeted to kind of community and quite localized. So I do see them as kind of quite separate, and other regional districts have kind of looked at these. They call them regional grants and community grants because there's victims with. So yeah, that's how I'm kind of seeing it playing out, is that the grant and aid is a valuable highly valuable and valued service, and it's a service that we can provide almost on the fly, right? It's a very responsive pot of money. Some people call it impact funding, I think is what it has an impact right away. So for me, that's kind of how those things divide out, and having clarity between victim services,
police-based victim services. Yep.
Police-based services is that regional aspect, which for me, that's where these things differentiate. The rural directors having control of their communities and provided by property value taxation, opposed to those broader social and community services. So that's kind of how I'm seeing it play out.
Okay, anybody else? Tina, Sherry, Tara, what else are you looking for here?
I think you've done a fabulous job.
All right, directors, Director McMahon, and then Tara. Let's go to Tara first, and we'll come to you, Director McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. The only thing I think that we might need is a direction just to take the policy away and bring it back at some point.
Mm-hmm. So we had started, I think, on a recommendation at the beginning to take the current policy and have staff go away and revise it and come up with a procedural, potentially procedure and program guide and a policy. I don't know exactly what kind of wording you need or want in there. We'd like to weigh in on that one.
Sherry was talking, but she was muted.
Yeah. Sherry?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say from a staff perspective, I think we're clear on the direction, but if the board chooses to add something, that's fine as well.
Okay, what would you like in a recommendation at this point? That staff take this away and come back with a revised policy? Something that's very simple like that? Okay, Tara, does that work for you? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Would someone like to make that recommendation and second it? Okay. And then do you want to speak to the recommendation? Okay. Director Hills.
Have we kind of covered off the reporting back? If I remember in the staff presentation, there were an option of an annual report. If I remember, that was how to report back on the success and the benefit to the community. And is that in the policy about how, is for me, that's what closes the loop between you collect the money, you send the money out, and then you evaluate where you're successful. So that's the only piece I'm wondering about. Is that part of policy or this reporting back? And I can't remember if that was in one of the slides about annual report.
Okay, Tara?
Thank you, Chair. What that was meaning was every annual report that comes out from the SCRD, there is a section on grant and aid, so it is public.
All right, no further questions on the recommendation on the floor. So this is electoral areas only. All those in favor? Thank you. All right, Director Ties and then Director McMahon.
Thank you. Yeah, I did want to bring up a topic that we discussed in the agenda preview, and that was that there are some organizations who submit year over year, and that's clearly shouldn't be part of the policy, and we're trying to discourage that. And I'm wondering what we would want to do with those, and specifically towards the Roberts Creek Mandala one, which is I think one of two that have applied every single year. I would like to make a motion that staff investigate the feasibility of having that be a parks funded function, because it happens in an SCRD park. and that it may be something that could be funded through parks.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded. Any further comment on the recommendation? Dr. McMahon.
Yeah, I kind of disagree with that. I mean, it's all very nice for the auditors to say that we shouldn't fund groups year over year, but this is a small community. You know, parades happen, Mandelas happen. The amount of money involved is relatively small. We do need to support community events. If they're going on year after year, that's actually a success. So I have actually no problem with repeatedly funding some of these.
Director Lee?
I really don't have a problem with year over year, but I did definitely wanted to talk about it because we get a lot of that, and I don't know how you would solve it. Would it become a service, or do we just plain accept that it's going to happen, and sometime in the future it might not happen, and we leave it in here? I don't know which way our staff would suggest how we deal with that. I'm curious. I had it down as a question because we have all sorts that come year over year. For instance, the youth outreach, the restorative justice, quite a few that come year after year, and they're all valid.
Perfect. I've got Tina and Tara both with their hands up. Who wants to go first? Tina?
I can go first. I think I got a text from Dean too. He's just on his en route somewhere, but definitely in the same vein as the youth or the social service function, there could be a festival and or community events stream. Some other regional districts do have that, so that's maybe a way to address that. But holistically, from the concept of the ability or a legislative framework to consistently provide funding to groups, I think is the question here. And it would be the how we would do that, I think is maybe what is wanting to be contemplated back, because what the auditors identified was more that the SCRD the SCRD board at that time requesting a review, was their assessment was just based on our current policies and bylaws. It didn't really delve into the legislation. And I think that's where staff would want to provide more direction back to the committee on that framework. Okay. If you
yeah. So maybe Director Ties would like to reword his recommendation. I mean, I get that everybody's asking the same question, right? So it's not just about the Mandela. Everybody's asking the question, how do we deal with those that are coming year after year after year that we typically want to fund? How do we do that? And staff would take that away and look at that. Director McMahon.
Again, I'm not having a problem with it because we're not guaranteeing this. They have to apply to us every year. They are not a guaranteed line item, and they're aware of that. For some of the larger ones, we do need to move them into the social services function. For one thing, I'll bet that the money is going towards salaries, which our policy says we're not supposed to. So those bigger ones, but for the small ones, the grassroots community groups, I just do it the way we're doing it.
Okay. Tara, did you want to weigh in?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add that upon reviewing other regional districts' policies in the past, what some of them have done is said if an applicant submits 2 or 3 years, they put it into their policy that submit 2 times and then you'll be looked at with some kind of scrutiny. It's just an example of how other people have handled that same situation.
What do you mean they'll have more scrutiny?
Well, they'll look at the project, and if it's a separate project versus if it's the same project, that, you know, and can they get other funding and those types of things. They put it right into their policy that's what they'll be looking at.
Mhm. Okay. Tina, did you want to speak to this again? No, thank you. Director Tides.
Well, I'm just wondering if we should go ahead with this motion and then add another one, or whether we should keep my track record going of defeated motions and try again.
Well, one of the examples that we have in the town of Gibsons, for example, that has been funded by the regional district through grant and aid in previous years is Sea Cavalcade, which now the volunteers have stepped down, and it's not going forward. If we do something like that with the Mandela and it's in the parks function, is that something then that the regional district would be looked at to take over if the community themselves don't want to necessarily do it? Just question. Director Hiltz.
Couple in terms of the Sea Cavalcade, that's out of usually the GGCP, which actually has a bylaw. So it might be something, you know, I'm not sure if it's slightly different than the rural grants and aid. And in terms of the reoccurring same project over and over again, you know, as Tara has mentioned, you can put a limit, say you can do same project 3 years, but then you got to take a break, or you got to re-envision this project to stimulate the change on the applicants. So, you know, that again is prescriptive. You can do this for 3 years, and after that, or yeah. But I'm okay leaving it in our discretion at this point. How things move from this into a regular service, I'd sure be interested to know how that happens as well, right? How you take something that the community has developed and turn it into an SCRD service. So I'm supportive of the broader context of how these things, rather than the specifics of the Mandela. So if we could broaden the scope, perhaps, I'm not sure.
Okay, Director Tides. We have a recommendation on the floor.
Well, I think it's still a worthwhile question to ask whether the Mandela, you know, project or the specifically can be moved into the parks function. I do hear the concern that we don't want the SCRD suddenly to be responsible for organizing Mandala projects. But you know, at the same time, there's that larger question, and so
we can vote on this recommendation that's on the floor, and then put another recommendation forward.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Director Pratt.
I understand where Director Ties is going with this motion. I am going to vote against it, just so you know, because the Mandela project, while it's worthwhile, it does happen within a park. It is more of an event within a park. It's not an actual maintenance thing that's happening within the park. So it's an art project. It's an event project. It's a community building project. So I understand this particular one. I'd rather, if we're going to have a recommendation going to staff, I'd rather keep it a bit broader. Maybe, you know, highlighting some projects that can be moved rather than this one just in specifics. Thanks.
I think the bigger question is, are we looking to have groups come to us for yearly grants for small projects that we know are never going to be self-funding, and we're okay with funding those, or they can only come to us for a while and we expect that at some point they become self-supporting and no longer require grants? That's the bigger question. Right, so there's a recommendation. Did you want to speak to the recommendation, Director McMahon?
I just wanted to speak to your comment. Parades are never going to be self-funding. You know, a lot of this stuff never is.
All right, so there's a recommendation on the floor that the staff explore moving the funding of the Mandela project into the parks function. Electoral areas only. All those in favor? All those opposed? That's defeated. Okay.
Way to go, Andres.
I gotta throw one of those out every now and then, you know.
All right. Does somebody want to make a recommendation around the multi-year applications? Is that something that you want staff to explore? Director Hiltz.
Is this going to in any way come back once we have another look at how this policy gets reformatted and things like this? And like, have we got enough to deal with at this point and kind of look at that, the next step, like step 2, after this draft process unfolds a bit? So I'm just, can it wait, this decision wait?
Tina and Tara.
And you know, our corporate officer most certainly can. I personally think it's a good idea for us to investigate. We can wait, we can draft the policy, but I think you're still going to have some blanks in there. And when your applications come forward again and community groups, because what I see is there's most certainly a trend of more needs than there are funds. And so, you know, to be well positioned to make these really well-informed decisions, you know, from my standpoint, yes, this got lots to do, but I think this is an important housekeeping item that we really should address.
Okay, I saw you. Yeah, okay. Sherry, I saw you unmute yourself there for a minute.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'm just agreeing with the CFO that it would be timely to address it while we're addressing the policy and contemplating it within that context.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Well, I was going to speak against it, but if staff think this is a good idea, then fine.
All right. So, Director Hiltz.
So the motion is something like that staff reports back about conversion. I'm not sure what we're talking about. I'm struggling.
Yeah, Director McMahon.
How about staff report back on how best to manage repeat grant needs over the years?
Are there 2 components to that? One is, how often does it happen? Right? I mean, I think we have some idea, but I think we need some information on frequency of repeat applications from the same group for the same activity, and then an analysis by staff as to how to potential pass forward or something like that on dealing with them. And Tara's probably got some wording that she can massage there. Director Hiltz?
It seems like something of conversion to a service is how these yearly applications can become a service. Seems to be what I think. Is that what we're talking about?
Well, I think that would be one of them. They may come back and say, you know what, they're minimal, they're small dollar amounts. No, like, we're okay with that. You could look at a service, you could look at whatever. That, I think that's part of what we would look at them to come back with. Tara?
Thank you, Chair. The staff report after investigation of the frequency of recurring rural areas grants and aid funded community projects and funding options through other SCRD services rather than rural areas grant and aid.
Okay, does that cover it off? Director McMahon?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Yeah, I forgot what I was going to say.
Okay, would someone like to make that recommendation? Moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded. And then speaking to the motion on the floor.
Our corporate officer unmuted herself briefly, so you may want to check in with her, please.
Okay, Sherry.
I was just,
Sorry, you guys are bouncing around the screen, right? So it's like, okay, who's all right, Sherry, go ahead.
I would just maybe suggest it be a little broader and that we also look at how it potentially fits into the grant and aid process as well. So not just other SCRD options, but also in contemplation within the grant and aid program, just to have a broad look at that.
Okay. Director McMahon, Director Ties, I saw your hand up.
Yes, I'm wondering if we need an amendment because it's been seconded that we add Sherry's amendment there. And if that's the case, I'll make that amendment.
Okay, so amendment's moved. Is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconded. Any further comments or questions on the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment? Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor that has been amended. And do you want to hear that before you vote on it? Oh, seeing nods, like people are saying no. All right, so we have an amended motion. All those in favor of the motion on the floor? Thank you very much. All right, anything further that we need to cover off around grant and aid? Got Director Hiltz and then Director McMahon.
Thanks, Chair. It's I'm reading in the authority to act, the 3.2, and it says that therefore the SCRD board has full discretion whether the grants are allocated. So is it the full board or is it just the EA directors? I'm just kind of, could all the EA directors just say yes, and then District of Sechelt says, I'm not sure if it would be a weighted vote. Could they outvote what the EAs say? So I guess, is it the full board that has the discretion in this service, in this policy?
Tina? Sherry, who wants to weigh in?
Sorry, Director, could you repeat the question?
Yes, he's looking at item
3.2, authority to act. It's where it says, therefore the SCRD board has full discretion whether the grants are allocated. So is it the full board or just the EAs that have this discretion? Because I'm not sure how. Yeah, that's my question.
So the full board votes on it when it comes to the board. What you're asking is it a weighted vote when it comes up at the board?
Well, and could the EAs be out? Yeah, is it a weighted vote? Does the full board get a vote on this particular item?
So once the funding is actually approved and that recommendation comes forward to the board, if it was pulled from the block, I'm going to say it depends. So if it was just particular to one rural area, all of the directors would vote on that. It would be the entirety of the board on that motion, but it may depend. I know that's not very helpful, is it? Yeah.
I think your question is, could the municipal directors, we could gang up and say, no, you're not going to give that money out.
So the local government rule is in the legislation, if there's something you're voting on for one specific area, no one director can vote on that. And so it would revert to a corporate vote. So yes, it would be all directors, rural and municipal.
And would it be weighted because it's finance?
Yes, it would be a weighted vote.
Okay. Right. So is that on the current question, Director Lee?
But if just say that two electoral areas each give a grant and aid for a particular project, would that then be just electoral areas that are voting on it?
Yes, so administration and operation of a service is the participants of the service. So if there were more than one director, it would just be those that are part of that service, correct? And it would be food as well.
Right, so that would be the one where there's the bylaw that's E and F or something, they would vote on that. But if it's grant and aid where all 5 are giving to one function or one project, for example, that's an individual service, an individual. So it would be the whole board voting.
Correct. If it's just one benefiting area, the entire board, or it could be just specifically to the 2. If there were 2 benefiting areas, then it would be those 2 participants.
Okay, you clear on that, Director Lee?
Not really, but I'm okay with it.
It's think about South Pender Water. One area, everybody votes.
Yes, I'm clear on that. But let's say it's something to do with the Half Moon Bay Fair, where a whole bunch of my people go down to the Half Moon Bay Fair. So I throw in some grant and aid. Are we both benefiting areas? Therefore, it's just the EAs, or?
So if you're contributing to that project, you would be considered as one of the benefiting participants, and you would be eligible to vote on that recommendation. Who's paying for the service? That kind of directs who gets to vote on that item. So if you're contributing to it, you are benefiting from it, you would be voting on that motion.
And there's 2 of us that were benefiting, so the 2 of us could vote, and if we both voted differently, we split. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
All right, Director McMahon and then Director Hills.
As much as I'm enjoying us inventing problems we don't have yet, I did want to get to the fact we have 5 rural areas and we have 8 rural grant and aid functions. And you know, I'm sure there's historical reasons for this, but it's awkward. Okay, it's especially with the Greater Gibsons one, which I take it was set up primarily for Sea Cavalcade, and we're not having a Sea Cavalcade now. Is there anything we can do about either cleaning this up or getting more clarity, or even not using some of these functions that we have?
Tina?
Yes. So if there was a desire to change the administration of how you allocate these funds, so some of these have already established services, and there's a legislative process which to unwind something is much more challenging. So you could always not allocate funds into that particular pot anymore. That could be an alternative way to address it. But you know, we could always provide pros and cons to that, but that would be a way to do it. We wouldn't dissolve the service per se. We just wouldn't have any money there to distribute. So.
Okay, Director Beamish. Sorry, and we'll come back, Director McMahon. Director Beamish?
Yeah, the Sea Cavalcade set aside this year because of COVID. They had done a lot of work to put it together and had a strong volunteer committee, but COVID came along, and that's why it was set aside this year. So there is an intention, I think, to go forward with it. So just bear that in mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think what Director McMahon's getting at, though, is do we need a separate grant and aid pot for that? Or if they're going to fund grant and aid, or Sea Cavalcade, for example, could it just come out of the regular E bucket and the regular F bucket rather than a separate bucket specifically? Tina?
You could, but one of the things, the rationale as to why those particular services were established is that if you have E and F together, how those funds are requisitioned, you have the area F industrial included in some of that. So again, it's also how those funds are requisitioned and apportioned are also part of the consideration, because just F would then be generated a certain fashion, area E would be generated a certain fashion. So it would create this difference in how those funds were actually taxed to the individual taxpayers. So if you, for instance, added another 50,000 to the E grant and aid, your tax area would shoulder 100% of that burden, where they would have shouldered a different percentage of the burden. So We just have to be mindful of that.
Director McMahon, follow up.
Yeah, I'm generally aware of the historical reasons for this. It's just, it would help to have some kind of written clarity about this, because I think we both struggle with this every year, because we have E, we have F, we have E and F, and then we have greater gives. And so trying to figure out what to do with it is a little challenging, and it would just help to maybe have a little bit of written background on this.
Okay, looks like another recommendation coming. Director Hiltz.
As awkward as it is, there is a certain amount of discretion and there is a certain amount of regional district logic in it, it seems. So whether I would want to do that now, I'm not sure. In some ways, what it's trying to do is it forces E, F, and G to cooperate, which is kind of what I see the money doing is cooperate, guys. So I'm kind of getting used to it, and the policy side is, I think, lies within the directors of E, F, and G to some extent to kind of work it out, because it is a discretionary service, and this is one of the few places we get to kind of usurp the executive authority, and we get to kind of go rogue here, right? So I'm not as confused by it as I was at one time.
Director McMahon, and Tina's got her hand up too. Sorry, Tina. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I just think I'm asking for more clarity, more written clarity, because every new director for E and F that comes in is going to have to wrestle with this thing. So having a little more understanding of what they're dealing with would be really helpful.
Okay, so what information specifically are you looking for?
I guess I'm looking for the rationale for the different services and why they were established. And traditionally, how has the funding been used for each of these?
Okay, would you like to make a recommendation that information come forward? Okay, and Director Hiltz is seconding that. Terry, you got that? Okay, Director Hiltz.
Yeah, to bring forth the information, particularly that bylaw 1060, which governs the GCCP. I'd sure like to see what it says and some background on that. Yeah, so yeah, supportive, and as long as that's included, bringing forth that bylaw so we can see what it says. Yeah, and sure, I'm supportive.
Okay, and are we specific, Tara, in the recommendation that it's for the E and F and the whatever the other one is, the GCC whatever thing is? Do you want to repeat that recommendation?
Yes, thank you, Chair. That staff report with the history of the functions, the rationale, and how the funding has been used for functions 1, 2, 3, E, and F, rural areas grant and aid, and 1, 2, 6, Greater Gibson's community participation grant and aid, including a copy of the bylaw.
All right, looks like we've got thumbs up on that one, and wordsmithing is good. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor? Thank you. All right, anything further? I want to thank the rural area directors before we get to Director McMahon. You've done a lot of thinking on this prior to coming into this meeting. You know the issues, and I think we're pretty much at the point where we've addressed the majority. I think Director McMahon may have one further. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, just the one question that and you may have answered this at some point, but I've forgotten. So if we do establish a social services service, how long is that going to take? Like, when is that? Would that likely come into effect?
Sherry? Oh, and you're on mute.
When would what come into effect?
A social service function.
So I'm trying to recall the resolution from the staff report. And I believe the feasibility is scheduled for third quarter 2021. And there's quite a process to follow depending what comes out of the feasibility study. So it could take up to a year to fully establish a new service.
Okay, and is that something that has to go out to the public as well for approval?
Absolutely, yes.
Right. Okay, so it's a few years down the road, probably. All right, anything further? All right, I think we're done. I'd like a motion to adjourn the meeting. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you very much. And do we have any questions from the gallery? Seeing no questions, no hands up. We'll see you all back here at.
There's a hand up.
Okay, yes. Who's wanting to speak? Oh, Rick Jesperson, sorry. Go ahead, Rick. I'll have to give you, yep. You can unmute yourself. Thank you.
I couldn't do that until a window popped up to enable that. Just confirming that you are not, in fact, recommending a second intake.
We're not recommending what, sorry?
A second intake of.
That's right.
GIA.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. See you all back at 1:30.